The power to physically restrain a human being or seize property is the most dangerous form of energy in a society. In a constitutional system, this force is treated as a highly volatile power that requires absolute containment. Engineers design reactors for containment, prioritizing safety over speed. They rely on structure, measurements, and known physical laws. The legal system operates on this same principle, building structures to safely house the state's monopoly on physical force. Liberty is the starting point. In the eyes of the law, freedom is the default condition of every human being. The citizen carries no burden to justify their right to be free. Every government restraint on liberty is an exception to that rule. Because freedom is the baseline, the state carries the entire burden of proving it has the specific, lawful authority to interfere with a person. Without engineered structural containment, the volatile energy of state force naturally expands. It moves outward, breaking down boundaries until it destroys the baseline condition of liberty. The separation of powers functions as containment walls, dividing the government's energy. It separates the mind that writes law, the conscience that judges it, and the arm that enforces it. Executive power is strictly ministerial, lacking discretion to initiate force on its own authority. The executive arm carries into effect what the law and the courts have already decided. The system is designed so the hand that enforces the law can never be the same hand that creates the rule or decides guilt. Article 30 of the 1780 Massachusetts Declaration of Rights sets this structural mandate. The executive shall never exercise the legislative or judicial powers. This division creates a government of laws, where authority replaces personal will. This establishes the primary constitutional axiom: force follows judgment. In a lawful system, the state obtains permission through the structure before it reaches out its hand. To see how this containment works, we have to look at the exact millisecond the state exerts physical force on a civilian. The law defines an arrest as any restraint of a citizen's freedom of movement. It covers any moment the government controls a person's body through force or the threat of force. The moment a person is no longer free to walk away, they have experienced the touch of the state. This is the threshold where investigation becomes force. At this exact millisecond, the government must already possess complete and valid legal authorization to act. The legality of an arrest depends on the authority that existed before the physical touch. Discovering evidence after the fact cannot justify a restraint that was unauthorized the moment it began. Due process is a strict condition precedent required before the executive arm moves. It begins with a sworn oath to ensure accountability. Next, a neutral magistrate verifies facts to establish probable cause. This results in a warrant, the explicit written permission authorizing the restraint of liberty. The law requires particularity. This warrant naming Lee Harvey Oswald shows that the authority must be narrow and specific, prohibiting the general searches that characterize arbitrary government. Due process requires this mechanical sequence. Without an oath, a magistrate, and a warrant, the executive arm remains disconnected from the law. The common law structure includes specific exceptions for emergencies, where the standard sequence is too slow to protect the public from harm. The felony exception allows immediate action for violent crimes in progress. It exists to stop a person who has actually committed a serious offense and poses an immediate threat of flight or injury. The breach of the peace exception permits a warrantless arrest when violence occurs in the direct presence of the officer. The authority to act lasts only as long as the danger is ongoing. These are engineered pressure release valves designed to stop violence. They are limited to immediate necessity and provide no authority to bypass warrants for the purpose of investigation or punishment. We can now see the entire unbroken chain of authority. This sequence contains the final required gates that stand between a state accusation and a citizen's punishment. The grand jury is the first gate. It requires the state to obtain the agreement of the community before it can formally accuse a person of a crime. The petit jury is the final gate. No punishment may occur until the people themselves have reached a unanimous verdict. This structure is challenged when an agency is granted permission to bypass the magistrate and the juries, exercising the power to accuse, judge, and punish in the same branch. The law distinguishes between a procedural error and a failure of authority. A procedural mistake may make an act voidable, but skipping a condition precedent creates a more significant failure. An act taken without lawful authority is void from its inception. Because the government failed to satisfy the conditions of the law, the act has no legal force or effect. When the chain is broken, the officer has ceased executing the law. At that moment, the force used is a trespass against the liberty of a human being. This highlights the distinction between lawful authority and the color of authority. Uniforms, badges, and titles provide the color, the appearance of power, but titles cannot generate authority if the underlying chain of due process is broken. The authority must come from the law itself. Every citizen can test the legitimacy of government action by asking 3 structural questions. 1. What is the law? A rule must exist before there is anything for the state to enforce. 2. Was the chain of due process followed before the act? The government must prove its authority before it uses force. 3. Did force follow judgment, or did force come first? The modern administrative state increasingly reverses this sequence, acting first and using procedure to justify the force later. This marks a shift from the rule of law toward the rule of power, a transformation we will trace in Module 10.